For most of its history, Cyprus was a Greek island, but today it's split between the Republic of Cyprus, which controls only the Greek-speaking south, and the self-declared Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is only supported by Turkey. But the Greek and Turkish Cypriots weren't always quite so segregated, so then why did their efforts to cooperate break down, and then what caused them to divide so violently? Why did the island of Cyprus have to end up partitioned? Well, the kind of sad story of Cyprus's two main groups today began when the Mycenaean Greeks colonized the island at least 3,500 years ago. Cyprus would then be held by many powers, though always with an ethnically Greek population, until it ended up conquered by the Ottoman Empire in 1571. That began a period of Turkish migration to Cyprus, as well as the cultural conversion of some Greeks. Both groups then have made Cyprus their home since well beyond living memory, but it wasn't until the 1950s that intercommunal tensions really started to boil over. Before their independence, all Cypriots lived under British imperial administration. The UK acquired Cyprus from the Ottomans in 1878, but by the end of World War II, each Cypriot community had very different ideas about what Cyprus should become in a rapidly decolonizing world. The Greek Cypriots, led by the Archbishop of Cyprus, Makarios III, overwhelmingly favored an idea called Enosis, or union. They didn't see themselves as Cypriot nationals, just as Greeks who happened to live on the island of Cyprus, and they very much wanted to become a part of Greece proper. Likewise, the Turkish community saw themselves as Turks, like those in Turkey, and favored what they called Taksim, division of Cyprus between Turkey and Greece. For their part, Britain was uninterested in either. Empires don't tend to like giving up land, but the reactions to that from the Greek and Turkish Cypriots differed. Greek speakers made up some 78% of the population in 1960. They felt, because they were the clear majority on the island, they were entitled to independently determine Cyprus's future and join with Greece. So, when Britain didn't move to make Enosis happen, Makarios III authorized the creation of a militia group, the EOKA, to forcefully resist British occupation. It was supported by Greece and led by an experienced Greek colonel, Georgios Grivas, who had been born on Cyprus. The Turkish Cypriots, on the other hand, continued to advocate for partition, and frankly, they would have rather remained under British rule than become minorities on a Greek Cyprus. Backed by Turkey, they formed their own armed groups to combat the EOKA. Prominent was the Turkish Resistance Organization, led by the nationalistic Rauf Denktaş, while Cypriot-Turkish politics at that point were led by Dr. Fazıl Küçük. Eager to no longer have to deal with that situation, and to avoid causing a war between two of its allies, the UK, Greece, and Turkey are all members of NATO, by late 1958, Britain wanted out. In order not to annoy anyone too much, the Greek and Turkish Cypriot leaderships, plus their patrons in Athens and Ankara, were convinced to accept a compromise between Enosis and Taksim, independence, with a rather unique constitution. That was designed to enable the communities to share power. It was also probably doomed from the start. The Republic of Cyprus came into being on August 16, 1960. Its president, elected by the Greek Cypriots, was Archbishop Makarios. Its vice president, elected by the Cypriot Turks, was Dr. Küçük. Both had veto powers over legislation, which would be made by a parliament that was mandated to allocate seats to the two communities at a ratio of 7-3. That same split was applied widely, including to government ministers and the civil service, while the state's armed forces were to be 60% Greek and 40% Turkish Cypriot. The constitution was written with the consultation of Greece and Turkey, and it allowed both an exceptional amount of influence over what was supposed to be a sovereign state. As a condition of independence, they, along with Britain, became guarantor powers of Cypriot sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence through the Treaty of Guarantee. That also gave each an explicit right of intervention to ensure the new status quo remained on Cyprus. Another treaty stipulated that small parts of the island would remain sovereign British military bases, and they do to this day. For the Cypriot Turks, the Treaty of Guarantee felt absolutely essential. At less than 20% of the population, they would have had no power to stop the Greek majority from enacting Enosis without the protection of Turkey. For the Greek Cypriots, it was an outrage. They argued that under such conditions, Cyprus was not fully sovereign, and also feared a Turkish invasion to bring about Taksim by force, all of which highlights just how little trust existed between the two communities, as well as the fact that neither had developed a Cypriot nationality, and both saw Cyprus as an artificial state. No surprise then, the government collapsed in 1963. Exactly why is a very contentious matter. Obviously, each side blames the other, but the crisis was certainly ignited by gridlock over how to run local governments. President Makarios then introduced 13 constitutional amendments that, from the perspective of the Greek Cypriots, would have ensured smooth functioning of government. The obstructionist Turks then withdrew from power sharing. From the perspective of the Cypriot Turks, though, Makarios was making a move to ensure Greek domination of politics, and they didn't abandon the constitutional framework, they were forced out. Either way, though, the Republic of Cyprus became a totally Greek Cypriot-controlled state. In truth, both interpretations of the events of 1963 are mostly true. Remember, neither group was invested in the survival of the Republic's political system. The consequences on the ground were nasty, though. Turkish Cypriot protesters and paramilitaries on the streets were met by equally zealous Greeks. The collapse of power sharing saw the communities almost fully segregate, with the minority Turkish speakers living in scattered enclaves. However, they were not exclusively in the north as they are today. That's part of why agreeing to some form of Taksim was still so unpalatable to the Greek Cypriots. You simply couldn't just carve away a clean 18% or so of Cyprus for the Turks. But, feeling under siege from the Greeks, they became more determined to stand up for themselves. Violence broke out again in 1967 when a pro-Enosis coup d'etat overthrew the government of Greece. That fighting led to the Cypriot Turkish community, led by Denktash, effectively, but not technically, seceding from the Cypriot state. They had not yet declared independence, and for 6 years Denktash and Makarios' governments engaged in negotiations. That was complicated by two factors. First, while most Cypriot Turks just wanted to live in peace, Denktash had a bit of a hero complex. He was provocative and not a man for compromise. Second, a split had opened in the Greek Cypriot camp. Makarios and his supporters, a majority, were no longer dead set on Enosis. However, some Greek Cypriots, and definitely the military junta in Athens, had not given up on the idea. In 1971, the old EOKA colonel Grivas was sent from Greece to Cyprus to form a new organization, the EOKA-B. This time, they fought Makarios' Cypriot government. When Grivas died in 1974, his forces came basically under the direct control of the Greek junta, and in July, the EOKA-B, joined by Greek officers in the Cypriot National Guard, seized the presidential palace and forced Makarios to flee. The other two guarantor powers took notice of that. Britain, no longer the empire she once was, decided to sit it out, but Turkey, as was its right, invaded the island. Within 3 days, they had effectively forged a corridor to the Turkish sections of Nicosia, Cyprus's capital, and in doing so brought about the collapse of Greece's junta, totally unprepared to actually put up a fight, as well as its Cypriot puppet government. On July 23rd, the Turks halted their advance, and negotiations began in Geneva, and if it had ended there, the Cyprus issue might not be so complex today. Up until then, Turkey acted entirely legally via the Guarantee Treaty. The next bit's more problematic. On August 14th, negotiations paused because Makarios, restored as president, was abroad. Turkey took advantage of that and the relative weakness of the Greek Cypriot forces to restart their offensive, and in another 3-day campaign, they captured about 36% of Cyprus. This time it was clear their intent was not to restore a united island, but to seize land to create a homogeneous Turkish state. Some 160,000 Greek Cypriots had their property seized and fled from the occupied north, while 50,000 Turks from the south moved into the Turkish-occupied zone. The United Nations established a peacekeeping force on the ceasefire lines, and that exists to this day. Denktash proclaimed the creation of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus in 1983. Only Turkey has ever accepted it as a state. The third largest island in the Mediterranean then remains partitioned, but it's not the only one with an interesting history. You can find out how Corsica became a part of France, an event that made possible the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, in the video to the left. And as always, I've been James, and thank you for watching Look Back History.